For 5 days, a she-wolf begged for help at a well, and what the man did shocked everyone. What would make a wild beast, an eternal symbol of fear and freedom, break all the laws of nature? What would make it come to its most dangerous enemy, a human being, and look at him not with hatred, but with desperate pleading? This story began on the hottest day of the most stifling summer, when the scorching air shimmered above the ground, and an old well on the edge of the village of Zaozersko became the place where two worlds collided. Ignat Zavialov, a former gamekeeper and now a reclusive old man, stepped onto the porch of his house as he had done thousands of times before. The door creaked. The bucket in his hand felt light. But this morning, everything was different. 20 paces away, by the old well, sat a she-wolf. Not a cub, not an old, sick animal. A large, strong female in her prime. She didn't growl. She didn't snarl. She just sat there on the sun-scorched grass and stared straight at him. Ignat froze, his hand with the bucket hanging in the air. In his 52 years, most of which he had spent in the forest, he had never seen anything like it. A wolf near a house was always a threat. It meant attack. It meant death. But there was no aggression in her yellow, intelligent eyes. There was only a strange, heavy weariness and something else that Ignat couldn't understand. Something like a question. He slowly backed away into the shade, and his hand automatically found the cold metal of the double-barreled shotgun standing in the corner. He was a gamekeeper. He knew what to do. Any animal that came out to the village in broad daylight was almost certainly rabid, and a rabid animal had to be destroyed, immediately, without pity or hesitation. He loaded the gun, the click of the bolt sounding deafeningly loud in the morning silence. But when he stepped back onto the porch, ready to pull the trigger, the she-wolf did not move. She only flattened her ears slightly and whimpered softly. That sound, thin and full of suffering, stopped Ignat's finger, which was already on the trigger. Before we continue, let us know what city you are from. We are interested in knowing where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's begin. The entire first day passed in this strange, silent standoff. Ignat did not move from the window, clutching the rifle in his hands, which seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. The she-wolf did not leave. She lay in the shade of an old apple tree, breathing heavily from the heat, and kept her eyes fixed on his house. Sometimes she got up, approached the well as if she wanted to drink, but didn't dare to get closer, and returned to her place. She didn't behave like a rabid animal. Rabid animals rush about, drooling, their eyes wild. But this one looked thoughtful, too sensibly. By noon, the news had spread throughout Zaozersk. The first to notice her was Kolya Sychev, a 15-year-old boy who was riding his bike outside the village. He saw a gray shadow near Zavialov's house and, almost falling off his bike in fear, rushed back. An hour later, a crowd had gathered at the store. Men were talking loudly, smoking, and the word "shoot" hung in the air. The leader was Stepan Kryukov, the local head of the administration and the largest farmer. For him, a man of action, everything was simple and clear. A wolf near the village was a threat to livestock. The threat had to be eliminated. "What's there to think about?" His bass voice boomed. "Ignat has a gun. If he can't do it himself, we'll help him. I lost a sheep yesterday. Maybe it was the wolf's doing." Stepan was a man as straight as the barrel of his rifle. He didn't believe in fairy tales and omens. He believed in bullets and common sense. And common sense told him that a wolf's place was in the forest, or better yet, in the next world. Ignat heard the rumble of voices coming from the center of the village. He knew they would be coming for him soon, and he had to decide what to do. His finger kept falling on the trigger, but he couldn't pull it. Something in the wolf's gaze caught him, awakening something in his soul that he had tried to bury for years. Memories of another tragedy, of another gaze full of pain, in which he had been unable to help. At night, Ignat had nightmares. He dreamed again of that day 5 years ago. The fog in the forest was thick as milk. A lost tourist from Moscow, whom he, the best hunter in the area, had given the wrong directions. He remembered the panic in the guy's eyes, his desperate cry that was swallowed by the forest. They found him only 3 days later. Too late. Ignat didn't fire a warning shot into the air. He spared his bullets. That petty economy cost a man his life. After that, he handed in his license, locked himself in his house, and stopped talking to people. And now, in his dream, the tourist's face merged with the wolf's muzzle, and her yellow eyes looked at him with the same silent reproach. He woke up in a cold sweat at dawn on the second day. The first thing he did was rush to the window. She was there. The wolf was sitting in the same place, only now she looked even more exhausted. Her fur was matted, and she was breathing heavily. Ignat noticed that she was periodically turning her head in the same direction, peering into the thicket that began just beyond his plot. It was as if she was waiting for someone, or calling him there. At that moment, he made a decision. He would not shoot. At least not yet. He had to understand what was going on. This decision went against all his experience, all the rules of survival he knew, but the guilt that had intensified during the sleepless night was stronger than fear. He poured water from a bucket standing in the hallway into an old iron bowl, and opening the door, slowly walked toward the well. The she-wolf rose. Her body tensed. She growled softly, but did not retreat. Ignat placed the bowl on the ground halfway between the house and her, then slowly backed away. She watched him, then looked at the bowl. A minute passed, then another. Finally, overcome by thirst, she took a few uncertain steps forward. She drank for a long time, greedily, raising her head every now and then to look at the window where Ignat was standing. When the bowl was empty, the she-wolf did not leave. She came a few steps closer to his house than she had been sitting before, and lay down again, resting her head on her paws. But her gaze was now even more insistent, even more imploring, and she looked again at him, then toward the forest, as if to say, "That's not all. The main thing is there." At that moment, Stepan appeared from the village. He was walking quickly and decisively, followed at a slight distance by 2 other men with hunting rifles. Seeing that the she-wolf was alive and sitting almost at Ignat's doorstep, Stepan turned pale. "Zavialov," he shouted, not reaching the gate. "Are you out of your mind? What are you doing? Feeding a predator near your house?" Ignat silently stepped out onto the porch. He stood so as to partially shield the she-wolf. "She's not rabid, Stepan," he said quietly but firmly. "I don't care what she is." Kryukov exploded. "People are panicking. Children are afraid to go outside. You have 5 minutes, Ignat. Either you shoot her or we will. And don't be offended if we hit your shed." The men behind Stepan raised their guns demonstratively. The she-wolf jumped up, the hair on her neck standing on end. She growled quietly, but not at the men, somewhere to the side. She looked at Ignat, and there was no threat in her growl. There was despair. "I won't let you kill her," Ignat said, surprised at his own determination. He didn't know why he was doing this. He just felt that if he let them shoot now, he would betray not only this animal, but also the last chance at redemption that, for some reason, had been given to him. The confrontation became open. The old hermit against the entire village. And time was running out. "You're out of your mind, Petrovich," Stepan hissed, keeping his rifle aimed. He didn't see the respected gamekeeper he once knew, but a crazy old man defending a wild beast. "You'll answer for this yourself." But Ignat didn't listen. He stared at the she-wolf. She did something he did not expect. She took a step toward him, then another. She closed the distance to a dangerous point, but her posture was not aggressive, but pleading. She whimpered softly again and turned her head toward the forest. It was so obvious, so humanly understandable, that Ignat caught his breath. She wasn't just asking for help. She was showing him where the help was needed. At that tense moment, when it seemed that a shot was about to ring out, a creaky voice came from the path leading from the village. "Wait, you bastards!" Alevtina Fyodorovna, the local witch doctor, was slowly approaching the house. She was leaning on a stick, but her clear eyes looked stern and commanding. "What are you thinking, Matveyich? Hurting a living soul near your home?" Stepan grimaced. No one in the village dared to argue with Alevtina. "Fyodorovna, don't get involved," he muttered. "This is none of your business. It's a predator." Alevtina came closer, stopped, and looked intently at the she-wolf, then at Ignat. "The beast knows who to go to," she said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Lord of the Forest doesn't just come to someone's doorstep like that. It means something bad has happened to him. Something only a human can fix." She spoke in riddles, as always. But her words hung in the hot air, making the hunters behind Stepan shift uncertainly from foot to foot, and Ignat suddenly realized that the old woman was right. This was not madness. It was a cry for help, and he was the only one who could answer it. Alevtina's gaze gave him strength. Stepan spat on the ground. The old woman's words had shaken his men, but not him. "It's all fairy tales. I'll be back in an hour, and if she's still here, blame yourself, Ignat." He turned around and, casting an angry glance at Zavyalov, strode back to the village. The men reluctantly followed him. Silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets, enveloped the house again. Ignat took a deep breath. He had gained a little time. Alevtina nodded to him, as if approving of his actions, and slowly wandered away. As soon as the men had left, the she-wolf lay down again, but now her anxiety was almost unbearable. She fidgeted, whimpered quietly, and dug at the ground with her paws. She looked at Ignat, and in her eyes was the despair of a mother. And then it hit him, a simple and terrible realization. A wolf cub. Somewhere out there in the forest, her cub was in trouble. Nothing else would have brought her here into enemy territory. Everything fell into place. Her persistence, her pleas, her glances toward the forest. She hadn't come to beg for herself. She had come for her child. This realization hit Ignat harder than any nightmare. Because once again, he found himself in a situation where someone else's life depended on him. And once again, he was alone against everyone. He looked at the sun, which was already sinking toward the horizon. There was almost no time left. He had to act before Stepan returned. He went into the house, but not for his rifle. He took an old backpack, threw in a water canteen, a coil of rope, a lantern, and a heavy pair of bolt cutters. Then he went out onto the porch. "Well," he said quietly, turning to the she-wolf, "lead the way. Show me where your trouble is." The beast seemed to understand his words. She slowly got up, looked at him one last time, and without looking back, trotted toward the forest. Ignat slung the backpack over his shoulders and followed her. He didn't know what awaited him ahead. A trap? Or a chance to finally fix what had been broken in his soul many years ago? He walked into the thickening twilight, and only the gray shadow of the she-wolf, flashing between the trees, was his guide. He did not notice another small shadow gliding out from behind the hazel bushes behind him. Teenager Kolya, who had seen everything, couldn't overcome his curiosity and followed. The forest greeted Ignat with coolness and silence. The she-wolf ran ahead, about 30 meters away, constantly looking back to check if he was following her. She moved confidently, choosing barely visible animal trails. Despite his age, Ignat walked quickly and almost silently. Decades of service as a gamekeeper had left their mark. He knew these places. It was an old, abandoned part of the forest, where people hardly ever went because of the windbreaks and swamps. It was the perfect place for a wolf's lair, and the perfect place for old, forgotten traps. His suspicion grew with every step. He could almost physically feel the approaching danger. After about half an hour of brisk walking, the she-wolf stopped. She froze at the edge of a small clearing overgrown with tall grass and looked at Ignat. Then she let out a quiet, guttural sound full of pain. Ignat slowed his pace. He took a flashlight out of his backpack, even though it was still light enough. Something about the wolf's complete stillness alarmed him. He took a few more steps and saw it. In the center of the clearing, in the thick grass, lay a small wolf cub. Its front paw was tightly clamped in an old, rusty trap. The trap was chained to a stake driven into the ground. The wolf cub was still alive, but very weak. It did not move, only occasionally its body was shaken by a slight tremor. The ground around the trap was trampled and dug up. The she-wolf had been trying for hours to free her cub, but only tightened the steel spring. Now everything was clear. Every piece of this terrible puzzle fell into place. Ignat slowly lowered his backpack to the ground. The mother wolf did not move. She stood nearby, watching his every move. Her eyes were filled with fear and last hope. She growled when he came too close, but it was not a growl of aggression, but of desperate defense. She was afraid of him, but she understood that he was her only chance. Ignat took out a pair of wire cutters. The rusty mechanism of the trap was jammed. To pry it open, he needed not only strength, but also time. Time he didn't have. Because at that very moment in the village, Stepan Kryukov, having waited for the agreed time, was gathering his men. "Enough waiting," he thundered. "Zavyalov has gone mad. The wolf has led him into the forest. It's a trap. Grab your guns, let's go after him. If anything happens, shoot without warning." And 3 armed men set off in pursuit of Ignat, driven by a single goal, to destroy the beast, not realizing that they were going to pass judgment where only mercy was needed. Ignat knelt down a few meters from the wounded wolf cub. The air was heavy, smelling of rusty iron, rotten leaves, and the faint scent of blood. The wolf cub did not whimper. It only trembled slightly, its eyes half closed. The mother wolf tensed like a string. A low, guttural growl rose from her chest. She took a step forward, then another, her yellow eyes burning in the dim light of the forest. She didn't trust him. She was afraid. But she didn't leave. Ignat knew that any sudden movement, any loud noise could cost him his life. Slowly, very slowly, he placed the heavy bolt cutters on the ground in front of him. "Quiet, Mommy, quiet," he whispered, not looking at her, but addressing the space around him. His voice was hoarse and calm, the same voice he had once used to calm frightened horses and wounded deer. "I won't hurt you. I'm here to help. You see, to help. He said this not so much to the animal as to himself, convincing himself that he was doing the right thing. He slowly reached for the bolt cutters. The wolf growled louder, lunging forward and snapping her teeth. Ignat froze, his hand hanging a centimeter from the tool. He didn't take his eyes off the rusty trap mechanism. He had to show her that his target was not her child, but this piece of dead iron. He spoke again, just as quietly and monotonously, telling her how this old trap worked, how the spring pressed on the bone, how to bite through the holder to weaken the grip. He spoke, and his own voice calmed him, gave him strength. Finally, he made up his mind. With one smooth movement, he took the wire cutters and brought them to the trap. At that moment, from behind an old pile of debris, about 50 meters away, Kolya watched what was happening, not breathing. He lay on his stomach, pressing himself into the ground, and his heart was beating so loudly that he thought everyone in the forest could hear it. He saw everything: the exhausted wolf cub, its desperate mother, and old Zavyalov, who seemed to be talking to a wild beast. It was like a terrible fairy tale come to life. He saw Ignat trying to fit the bolt cutters to the thick spring and heard the scraping of metal. Then he heard another sound, the crackling of branches and muffled male voices. They were getting closer. Stepan Kryukov led the way, pushing through the bushes with the stubbornness of a bulldozer. Behind him, trying not to make a sound, were his two henchmen, the Sizov brothers, the best hunters in the village. "I told you, he's lost his mind," Stepan hissed, pushing a branch away from his face. "He'll lure him into his lair, and then we'll never see him again." "Maybe we should go back, Matveyich," the younger Sizov suggested uncertainly. "If we leave, he'll come out himself." "Where will he come out?" Stepan interrupted him. "To the other world? I'm responsible for him to the district. It's been said that there's a predator near the village, so the predator must be eliminated, and anyone who helps him must be brought to their senses." His confidence had an effect on the others. They were simple men, accustomed to order. A wolf meant chaos. Stepan meant order. They moved toward the sound, which was growing clearer, a strange, rhythmic grinding of metal. When they reached the edge of the clearing, they froze in their tracks. The scene that met their eyes was beyond comprehension. Their fellow villager, the recluse Ignat Zavyalov, was kneeling in front of a wolf cub trapped in a snare. 3 steps away, staring intently at him, stood a huge she-wolf. She did not attack. She waited. For a moment, all 3 were speechless. It was so wrong, so unnatural that their brains refused to accept it. Stepan was the first to come to his senses. His face was contorted with rage and incomprehension. "Zavyalov!" He yelled so loudly that the birds flew up from the nearest trees. The she-wolf shuddered at his cry and bared her teeth, now looking at the newcomers. The wolf cub squeaked pitifully. Ignat slowly raised his head. His face was pale and covered with sweat. "Don't make any noise, Stepan," he said quietly. "Don't make any noise?" roared Kryukov, raising his rifle. "What are you doing, you idiot? She'll tear you to pieces. Get away from her, now." Ignat didn't move. He saw the barrel pointed at him, saw Stepan's face contorted with rage. But he also saw the hope in the wolf's eyes give way to primal terror. She understood that these people had come to kill. "Put down your gun, Stepan." Ignat's voice was as hard as steel. "You don't understand. She was asking for help." "I can see she's going to help you now. She'll send you to the other world," Stepan shouted. "It's a trap. She lured you in on purpose, you old fool. Brothers, aim at the female. Ignat, you have 3 seconds to step back." The Sizov brothers hesitantly raised their double-barreled shotguns. They also didn't understand what was happening, but the order had been given. They saw the she-wolf slowly backing away sideways toward her cub, crouching low to the ground and preparing to pounce. She had no intention of running away. She was going to defend her child until her last breath. Kolya, watching all this from his hiding place, covered his mouth with his hand to keep from screaming. He saw Stepan's finger rest on the trigger. He saw Ignat's back tense. Time stood still. In that last moment before the shot, Ignat did something that shocked everyone even more than his conversation with the wolf. He didn't jump aside. He didn't run away. Slowly, with his whole body, he turned and shielded the she-wolf and her wounded cub. He stood directly in the line of fire, spreading his arms wide. His thin, stooped figure in an old, faded shirt became a living shield between the armed men and the wild beast. "Shoot," he said quietly, but his voice carried across the clearing. "Only you'll have to shoot me first." Stepan froze with his finger on the trigger. He hadn't expected this. Killing a wolf was a job. Killing a rabid beast was a necessity. But shooting a man, a fellow villager? His brain refused to process the situation. What are you doing, Petrovich? Get back. It's a predator." His voice trembled. "And who are you, Stepan?" Ignat looked him straight in the eye, and there was such intensity in his gaze that Kryukov involuntarily lowered the barrel a few centimeters. "Are you a judge? Or an executioner? You see a beast, but I see a mother who has come for help to the person she fears most in the world. She had the sense to do that. Do you?" These words, simple and quiet, struck harder than any shout. The Sizov brothers behind Stepan exchanged glances and slowly lowered their guns. They were hunters, not killers. They saw what Ignat saw. They saw not a monster, but a mother in despair. But Stepan was made of different stuff. His stubbornness and his conviction that he was right fought with what he saw. "This is all wrong," he muttered, still not lowering his rifle. At that moment, there was a crack behind him. Kolya, unable to withstand the tension, moved awkwardly and stepped on a dry branch. Stepan spun around at the sound, and in that instant, Ignat realized he had only one chance. Stepan's distraction gave him a second. He lunged back toward the trap, grabbed the bolt cutters, and putting all his strength, all his fury, and all his desperation into it, pressed down on the handles. There was a deafening metallic crash. The rusty spring of the trap that had held the wolf cub's paw snapped with a loud screech. The trap's jaws sprang open. The wolf cub, yelping from the sudden pain and freedom, tried to stand up, but his mangled paw wouldn't hold him. He collapsed to the ground. The she-wolf instantly rushed to him. She sniffed him, began feverishly licking his wound, whimpering softly. She paid no more attention to the people. Her whole world had narrowed to her rescued child. Ignat threw away the broken bolt cutters and sank heavily to the ground. His strength had left him. He had done everything he could. Stepan and the Sizov brothers stood in complete silence. They lowered their weapons. What had just happened before their eyes had shattered their familiar worldview. They had come to kill a predator, but instead they had witnessed an incredible act of trust between a human and an animal. They had seen how an old, forgotten hermit had risked his life to save a wolf cub, and how a wild she-wolf had allowed him to do so. The silence was broken only by a quiet sob. It was Kolya. He slowly emerged from his hiding place, unable to hide any longer. Tears streamed down his face. Stepan looked at him, then at Ignat, then at the wolf family. His face, usually red and confident, became pale and confused. He slowly, very slowly, put his rifle on safety. The she-wolf, satisfied that her cub was alive, raised her head. She did not look at the hunters, nor at Stepan. She looked straight at Ignat. Their eyes met. There was no longer any fear or pleading in her yellow eyes. There was something else. Something ancient, like the forest itself. Gratitude. She gently took the weakened cub by the scruff of the neck, as all she-wolves do, and limping, slowly wandered deeper into the thicket. At the very edge of the forest, she stopped. She turned around one last time, looked at the man who had saved her, and then silently disappeared among the trees. 4 men and 1 teenager remained standing in the clearing, shaken to the core. They were silent. There was nothing to say. All words seemed petty and unnecessary compared to what they had just witnessed. Ignat was the first to break the silence. He struggled to his feet. "Let's go," he said simply. "It's time to go home." He didn't look at Stepan. He just walked down the path toward the village, and no one dared say a word to him. They returned to the village in complete silence, which was heavier and louder than any cry. Stepan Kryukov walked behind everyone, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. His usual sweeping gait had been replaced by an uncertain, shuffling one. He kept glancing at Ignat's back, who was walking ahead without turning around. Stepan's mind was in chaos. His simple and understandable picture of the world, where there was black and white, friends and enemies, predators and prey, was crumbling into tiny pieces. He saw how the she-wolf allowed a human, her worst enemy, to approach her wounded cub. He saw how this man, whom he considered a crazy hermit, shielded the animal with his body. This did not fit into any hunting tales or his life experience. He felt humiliated and at the same time saved from something terrible. If Ignat had not stopped him, he would have fired. And now there would be 2 corpses lying in that clearing. A wolf and possibly a man. The thought sent a chill down his spine. The Sizov brothers walked on either side of him, also silent and pensive. They understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, something they would tell their grandchildren about. Kolya shuffled alongside Ignat, not daring to speak. He kept glancing admiringly at the old man. In his eyes, Zavyalov had transformed from a sullen recluse into a true hero who understood the language of the forest and the animals. When they emerged from the forest at the edge of the village, they were already being waited for. Almost the entire village, alarmed by rumors and the armed expedition, had poured into the street. Seeing that everyone had returned alive, the people breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, Matveyich, did you kill the gray one?" Someone shouted from the crowd. Stepan stopped. He looked around the crowd with a heavy gaze. Everyone was waiting for him to tell them about the victory, about the threat that had been eliminated. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't tell the truth. They wouldn't believe him. They would laugh at him. And he couldn't lie. Instead, Ignat stepped forward. He looked tired, aged 10 years. "The threat is gone," he said quietly. But in the silence that followed, everyone heard him. "She's gone, and she won't be back." The men looked at each other incredulously. "How did she leave? On her own?" The men persisted. Ignat looked at Stepan. For a second, understanding flashed in their eyes. They became keepers of a secret. "On her own," Stepan confirmed firmly, surprising everyone, including himself. "She just left. We drove her away. Go home. It's all over." Disappointed by the lack of gory details, but reassured by the confident tone of their leader, the crowd began to slowly disperse, discussing what had happened. Stepan approached Ignat, He hesitated, shifted from foot to foot, and then held out his broad, calloused hand. "Thank you, Petrovich," he said hoarsely. You were right." Ignat silently shook his hand. That handshake was more important than any words. It was an acknowledgement, an apology, and the beginning of something new. Not friendship, no, but respect. Ignat nodded, and without looking at anyone else, wandered to his lonely house on the edge of the village. He felt deadly tired, but for the first time in 5 years, his heart felt light. The nightmares would not come to him tonight. A week passed. The heat had subsided, the first summer rains had passed, and the forest breathed with coolness. The story of the she-wolf slowly turned into a local legend. It was discussed at the store, on the farm, in every house. People told different stories. Some said that Zavialov was a sorcerer and had charmed the beast. Some claimed that the wolf was tame, having escaped from some kind of reserve. But those who had been in the clearing that day remained silent. They knew the truth, and that truth was simpler and at the same time more complicated than all the fabrications. Ignat Zavialov had changed. He did not suddenly become sociable and cheerful. No, he was still silent and preferred solitude. But the dull, long-standing melancholy had disappeared from his eyes. He began to go out into the village, repair the fence, and talk to his neighbors. He even helped Stepan repair his tractor. Seeing this change, people began to treat him differently. Fear and suspicion gave way to quiet respect. People began to call him Petrovich again, as they had when he was the best gamekeeper. One day, Alevtina Fyodorovna came to him. She brought him a bundle of dried herbs. They sat on the porch, drank tea, and were silent for a long time. "You saved your soul, Ignat," she finally said, looking off toward the forest, not just the wolf cub. Ignat said nothing, only nodded slowly. He knew she was right. The weight, the stone he had carried inside him for 5 years after the tourist's death, was gone. He hadn't forgotten the tragedy, no. But now he knew that he had atoned for his guilt. He hadn't been able to save that man, but he had saved another life when he had the chance. And that brought him peace. Kolya Sishev became a frequent guest at Ignat's house. He came under the pretext of helping with the housework. But in reality, he just wanted to be around this amazing man. Ignat taught him how to read animal tracks and showed him which mushrooms were edible and which were poisonous. He told him about the habits of birds and life in the forest. He passed on his knowledge and his love for the world, which he had kept inside himself for so long. The boy absorbed everything like a sponge. He saw the forest not just as a collection of trees, but as a living, complex organism where everything was connected. And he understood that that day in the clearing had changed not only Ignat, but him as well. One day in late August, when the forest was already beginning to take on its first autumn colors, Ignat went mushroom picking. He wandered far away, to the very place where he had found the wolf cub. The clearing was overgrown with new grass, and only the rusty remains of the trap, which he had not bothered to remove, reminded him of what had happened. He stood there for a while, remembering that day, and then continued along the old animal trail. Suddenly, he froze. Ahead, on the trail, he saw tracks. Wolf tracks. Large prints from a female, and, next to them, prints from a grown cub. He looked closer and saw that one of the cub's prints was incomplete, smeared. It was limping. But it was alive. It was growing and learning to survive in the forest with its mother. Ignat felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't go any further. This was their territory. He just stood there looking at the tracks, then quietly turned back. He didn't need to see them. It was enough for him to know that they were all right. It was his silent farewell and wish for good luck. He was sure he would never see that she-wolf again. Their paths had diverged. She returned to her wild world, and he to his, the human world. But the invisible thread that had bound them together during those 5 terrible and amazing days would remain forever. What had happened changed not only Ignat, but the entire village. Stepan Kryukov, although he did not speak about it aloud, began to view the forest differently. He forbade his workers from setting traps for foxes and hares as they had done before. "Let them live," he muttered. "Everything has its place." He began to visit Ignat more often, bringing him flour and sugar from the city, and they would sit on the porch for a long time, discussing the weather, the harvest, and village news. It was a strange, silent male friendship, born of conflict and turmoil. The people of Zaozersk became more attentive to each other and to the world around them. The story of how the old gamekeeper saved the wolf cub became part of their shared history, their folklore. It reminded them that even the wildest beast can have more humanity than a human being, and that an act of mercy can be stronger than the most accurate shot. Deep autumn arrived. The first frosts silvered the grass, and thick fog rolled over the river in the mornings. Ignat was preparing for winter, chopping wood, insulating the house. Life had returned to its usual routine. He felt at home for the first time in many years. One morning, stepping out onto the porch, he froze. On the bottom step, neatly laid out, lay a fresh white hare. There were no tracks around it, except his own from the previous day. He walked around the house and inspected the yard. No one was there. He knew that no one in the village would have done this, and no one could have approached so quietly without leaving a single blade of grass flattened. He picked up the hare. The body was still warm. He looked toward the forest, which was now almost bare and transparent. He saw no one, but he felt someone's gaze on him. He knew who had brought this gift. It was gratitude, a farewell gift from another world. He stood there for a long time, looking into the depths of the forest, and for the first time in many years, a smile appeared on his harsh, weather-beaten face. He was no longer alone. He was part of this vast world where life and death, fear and mercy, man and beast are bound together by unbreakable ties. He raised his hand in a farewell gesture, though he did not know if anyone could see him. And at that moment, he finally forgave himself. The weight of the past was gone forever, dissolving into the cold autumn air. A long winter lay ahead, but he was no longer afraid of it. He knew that spring would surely come. Winter came early and with a vengeance to Zaozersk. It covered the ground with a thick, clean blanket, froze the river, and brought with it a ringing, frosty silence. For Ignat Zavyalov, this winter was the first peaceful winter in many years. He no longer woke up in a cold sweat from nightmares. He had settled into a routine, insulated his house, and in the evenings, sitting by the hot stove, he read old books or repaired his fishing gear, listening to the blizzard howling outside the window. Kolya Sichev was now his main assistant and apprentice. Almost every day after school, he would run to Ignat, help him chop wood and clear the yard of snow, and in return receive invaluable lessons in forest lore. Ignat taught him how to set snares for hares, not for fun, but for food, and showed him how to read the forest by barely noticeable signs. A fox passed here. A capercaillie spent the night here. And this is a wolverine's track. The boy absorbed everything, and a silent, strong friendship developed between him and the old gamekeeper, the kind that only exists between a teacher and a student. Stepan Kryukov also experienced winter in a new way. Previously, at this time of year, he organized wolf hunts, considering it his direct responsibility. Now, when one of the men started talking about gray bandits, he frowned and cut them off. There are no bandits in our forest. There are masters, and there's no need to mess with them. His authority was unquestionable, and an unspoken peace settled between the village and the forest in Zaozerskoye. It seemed that that summer story had been a turning point for everyone, closing an old chapter and starting a new one, where man was not the king of nature, but only its neighbor. But in mid-January, this fragile peace was shattered. On a frosty, sunny day, a large black SUV with huge studded tires drove into the village. Such a vehicle was a rarity here. It slowly drove down the only street, kicking up clouds of snow, and stopped at the store. Two men got out. The first, the owner of the vehicle, was dressed in expensive imported camouflage, his face frozen in the disdainful expression of a city dweller who had found himself in the middle of nowhere. The second was a local, but not from Zaozersk, but from the regional center, a well-known guide and hunter named Yashka, who was ready to arrange any safari for rich clients for good money. They went into the store, and within half an hour, the whole village knew why they had come. The city bigwig, the owner of some factory, wanted a trophy, a big old wolf. And Yashka promised to get it for him, saying that a pack of wolves had been seen in the local forests. Stepan Kryukov met them at his office. He sat at his desk, massive and sullen, and looked at the uninvited guests without any hospitality. Wolf hunting is prohibited at this time. It's not the season, he said curtly, barely listening to them. The city man smiled. Matveyich, let's not do this. We're all human. We all understand. Here. He placed a thick wad of money on the table. This is for the village's needs. We just need some information. Where were the tracks last seen? Stepan looked at the money, then shifted his gaze to the smug face of the visitor. 6 months ago, he would probably have taken it. The wolf was a pest to him, and the money would have been a welcome addition to the village coffers. But now he looked at this man and saw not a hunter, but a killer who had come to have some fun. I said hunting is forbidden, he repeated slowly, pushing the wad of cash away. And no one will shoot in my woods. Leave while you're still in one piece. Yasha, the guide, tried to intervene. Stepan? What are you doing? It's just an animal. Get out, both of you, Stepan growled, rising from the table to his full height. And don't you dare show your faces here again. The visitors, who had not expected such a response from the head of a remote village, looked at each other and, taking the money, left, casting a malicious glance at Stepan. But Kryukov knew that this was not the end of the matter. People like that were not used to backing down. They would simply do everything quietly. He immediately went to Ignat. Zavyalov listened to him, staring silently into the fire. His face grew hard, and the wrinkles around his eyes deepened. They'll come themselves, he said at last. Yashka knows the old trails. They'll find the tracks, especially now, in the snow. What shall we do, Petrovich? Stepan asked. For the first time, he asked Ignat for advice, recognizing him as the leader in this matter. Watch, Ignat replied briefly. We need to know where they're going. And he entrusted this task to the best scout he knew. Kolya. The boy, understanding the importance of the mission, spent the next 2 days on the street, playing snowballs with other kids not far from where the black jeep had stopped. He pretended not to care about the strangers, but he watched their every move closely. On the 3rd day, at dawn, Kolya saw what he had been afraid of. Two hunters dressed in white camouflage suits and carrying rifles with telescopic sights came out of the house and, without starting the car, headed toward the forest on foot. They went in the same direction where Ignat had found the wolf cub in the summer. Kolya didn't waste a second. Gasping from running so fast in the cold, he rushed to Ignat's house. "Petrovich, they're gone. That way," he blurted out from the doorway. Ignat was already ready. His old hunting jacket, felt boots, and double-barreled shotgun were all at the ready. But he didn't take the gun. He took an old signal pistol, a rocket launcher, from the wall and tucked several cartridges into his bosom. "Tell Stepan," he said to Kolya. "Tell him to be ready. And you go home and don't take a step outside." Ignat left the house. A blizzard was beginning. The wind grew stronger, blowing sharp snow across the ground. The weather was on his side. The blizzard would cover the tracks and make the hunt more difficult. But it also made his own task almost impossible. He had to find the wolf family before the hunters did. He had to warn them, chase them away, save them once again. He walked quickly, leaving almost no traces, using every fold in the terrain to remain invisible. He was back in his element. But now he was not a hunter. He was a guardian. He followed the trail left by the two in white and prayed for only one thing: that he would make it in time. He knew that the she-wolf had no chance against a modern rifle with a scope. He also knew that the wolf cub, even though it had grown, was still limping. It would be their weak spot. It would be the first target. The blizzard was getting serious. Visibility dropped to a few dozen meters. The snow fell in the walls, blinding his eyes. It was becoming increasingly difficult to walk. But Ignat stubbornly pressed on, guided by his instincts and knowledge of the forest. He heard a bird chirp twice softly in the distance to his left. It was a signal. He knew it. This was how hunters communicated when they were stalking an animal. It meant they were close. They had found fresh tracks. The race against death had entered its final stage. Ignat rushed forward, sinking into the snowdrifts, choking on the icy wind. He had to outrun them, cut them off. He pulled a flare gun from his bosom. He had only one chance, one shot, to make a noise that would scare off the wolves, perhaps disorient the hunters. He ran, and only one thought pounded in his ears: make it, just make it. Ignat broke through the dense wall of spruce trees and jumped out onto a small clearing. The wind was a little weaker here, and he was able to stop for a moment to catch his breath and get his bearings. He knew this place. Ahead, about 300 meters away, was a deep ravine overgrown with thick willows, the perfect hiding place for a wolf's den in winter. That was most likely where the tracks led, and that was where the hunters were lying in wait. He looked to his right. Through the blizzard, he could barely make out two shadows in white camouflage suits. They weren't running. They were moving slowly, jumping from tree to tree, taking up positions at the edge of the ravine. They were professionals, and they were almost there. There was no time. Ignat realized that he wouldn't be able to get around them and chase the wolves away. Any noise on his part would only give him away and possibly provoke the hunters to shoot immediately. He had only one desperate plan left. It was risky, almost insane. But there was no other way out. He gripped the flare gun tighter in his hand. He had to distract them, become bait. He chose a large, spreading pine tree standing in an open spot and, taking a deep breath, let out a cry. It was not a human cry. It was a precise sound, honed over years. The call of the pack leader, loud, drawn out, and slightly alarming. He put all his skill, all his soul into it. The howl carried through the snow-covered forest, drowning out the sound of the blizzard. For a moment, everything froze. The shadows in the white froze in place, turning their heads toward him. They were confused. The howl did not come from the ravine where the tracks led, but from a completely different direction. It was illogical. It was wrong. Ignat, not giving them time to recover, fired the flare gun. A bright red star whistled into the gray sky, leaving a smoky trail behind it, and exploded over the forest with a deafening bang. The sound in the winter silence was like thunder. The effect was exactly what he had hoped for. A frightened squeal rang out in the ravine, followed by a furious bark in response. He heard the crack of branches as the wolf family broke away and ran in the opposite direction, deeper into the forest. They were saved. But now the hunters knew where he was. There he is, that bastard. He's scaring the beast. Yashka's furious cry carried through the wind. Get him! There was a sharp crack as a shot rang out. The bullet whistled through the air and struck the trunk of a pine tree a few inches from Ignat's head, showering him with sharp wood chips. He threw himself to the ground and rolled behind a tree just as the second bullet whistled through the air where he had been standing. They were shooting to kill. Now it was no longer just a hunt. It was a vendetta. They could not forgive him for the humiliation and the lost trophy. Ignat lay in the snow, pressed against the trunk of a pine tree. His heart was pounding in his chest. He was unarmed against 2 rifles with scopes. His old double-barreled shotgun was back home. He didn't stand a chance in an open confrontation. His only advantage was that he knew this forest like the back of his hand. They didn't. He waited for a short pause between shots, and when the wind whipped up a snowstorm again, reducing visibility, he jumped up and ran. Not back to the village, but deeper into the forest, into the thickest part of the windbreak, into the impenetrable undergrowth where a city hunter would never venture. He heard shouts behind him and several more shots, but the bullets flew aimlessly, lost in the snowy whirlwind. He ran, weaving between the trees, jumping over snow-covered trunks. His lungs burned from the icy air. His feet, encased in heavy felt boots, sank into the snowdrifts. But he didn't stop. He led them away, away from the wolf's trail, away from the village. He led them to a place where the forest itself would become his ally. Meanwhile, in Zaozersk, Stepan Kryukov had already roused all the men. When he heard from Kolya that Ignat had left alone, he knew that something was wrong. And when he heard first a howl, then the crack of a firecracker, followed by distinct rifle shots coming from the forest, he knew that something terrible had happened. "Follow me," he barked, grabbing his rifle from the wall. "Petrovich is being killed." A dozen men armed with old hunting rifles and axes rushed after him without a word. They were not soldiers, but they were going to defend their own. The man whom, 6 months ago, they themselves had been ready to tear to pieces. They were led by Kolya, who, despite Ignat's orders, couldn't stay at home and was now running ahead, showing the way. Ignat led his pursuers to Chertovo Bog. In summer, it was an impassable place, but in winter, under the snow, it looked like an ordinary clearing. But Ignat knew where the animal trails ran and where icy water and sticky quicksand lay hidden under a thin layer of snow and ice. He ran along a barely visible ridge he knew well, luring the hunters into a trap. "Stop! You can't go any further," Yashka shouted to his partner. He was a local and understood where the old gamekeeper had led them. But the city slicker, intoxicated by the thrill of the chase and his own rage, did not listen. "He's exhausted. There he is, I see him," he shouted. taking aim and firing. The bullet grazed Ignat's jacket sleeve, leaving a burning trail. He stumbled and fell. "Aha! I got him!" The shooter shouted triumphantly and rushed forward to finish off his prey. "Don't go there," Yashka shouted in despair. But it was too late. The city hunter took a few steps off the hard trail, and under his weight, the thin ice, dusted with snow, cracked and broke. With a cry of horror, he sank waist-deep into the icy, sticky slush. His expensive camouflage instantly became wet and heavy as lead, pulling him down to the bottom. The rifle slipped out of his hands and immediately disappeared into the black water. He flailed about, trying to get out, but the quicksand sucked him deeper and deeper. Yashka froze in horror at the edge of the swamp, not daring to approach. He knew that any attempt to help could end the same way. Ignat, overcoming the pain in his burned arm, slowly got up. He looked at the drowning man, at his face contorted with fear. He saw the life draining from him, panic giving way to despair. And at that moment, he saw the tourist who had gotten lost in the fog again. He had a choice again, to leave and let the man die, or to try to save the man who had just tried to kill him. This time, he didn't hesitate for a second. "Rope!" he shouted to the stunned Yashka. "If you have a rope, throw it." Yashka frantically began to rummage through his backpack. Ignat found a long, sturdy branch and began to slowly crawl toward the edge of the swamp, risking falling in himself at any moment. "Hold on!" he shouted to the man in the swamp. "Don't move. Save your strength." At that moment, Stepan Kryukov and the men from the village ran out to the edge of the clearing. They saw an incredible sight. Ignat, risking his life, was trying to save one of the men who had shot him, while the other stood helplessly on the bank. Stepan assessed the situation without a word. "Belts!" he commanded. "Take off your belts and tie them together." The men instantly began to pull off their belts, tying them together into a long, improvised rope. Within a minute, it was flying toward Ignat. He caught it, tied it around himself, and threw the other end to the drowning man. "Grab it!" he shouted, drowning out the howling wind. The man clung to the belt with a death grip. "Pull, all together," Stepan commanded. A dozen strong male hands pulled on the rope. A long, painful struggle began with the icy quagmire, which did not want to let go of its victim. With superhuman effort, slowly, inch by inch, they pulled him out. He was wet, shivering from the cold and the horror he had experienced, almost unconscious. They dragged him onto solid ground and immediately wrapped him in sheepskin coats. Yashka, pale as a sheet, threw his rifle into the snow and ran over to help. Stepan approached Ignat. He was sitting in the snow, clutching his wounded arm. "Are you alive, Petrovich?" asked Kryukov. Ignat nodded silently. He looked at the man he had saved, at his blue lips and trembling eyelashes, and felt neither anger nor triumph, only a dull, heavy fatigue and peace. This time he had made it. He had done everything right. They all walked back to the village together. The rescued hunter was carried on a makeshift stretcher at the front. Behind them, with their heads bowed, trailed the men who had witnessed yet another miracle. No one asked any questions. Everyone understood. The story that began on a hot summer day at an old well ended here, in a snow-covered forest, near a treacherous swamp. The circle was complete. Ignat Zavyalov, an outcast and a hermit who had saved 2 lives, first a wolf cub, then a man, had finally returned to society. He had atoned for his sins and found what he had been searching for all these years, forgiveness for himself. And while the men carried the rescued human life along the forest path, somewhere deep in the snow-covered thicket, safe and sound. The mother wolf licked her limping but alive and healthy firstborn, unaware that the man she had once asked for help had saved them both again. Two worlds, the world of humans and the world of animals, went their separate ways again, each according to its own laws. But the memory of what bound them together remained alive in the hearts of those who had seen it all with their own eyes. What do you think was the main turning point for Stepan? Seeing Ignat save the wolf cub, or his willingness to sacrifice himself to save his enemy?